The darkness of night, an eerie silence spread across the ocean. And cutting through that silence are some of the largest oil tankers in the world. Massive ships carrying enough oil to keep entire nations running. But what's truly astonishing is that these vessels are not sailing through a safe and peaceful sea. Instead, they are passing through one of the most dangerous maritime corridors on Earth. A place where the launch of a single missile could send shockwaves through the global economy. This is the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Military experts often describe it as the most dangerous choke point on Earth. On a map, it appears to be nothing more than a thin line of water, but in reality, it is the gateway that helps sustain modern civilization. Because for the vast oil reserves located in the Persian Gulf, there is only one route to the outside world, the Strait of Hormuz. But why is it that even the possibility of this narrow passage being closed is enough to shake economies across the globe? Just imagine that you're trapped inside a room with only one door. No windows, no alternate exit. And if someone locks that door from the outside, everyone inside will slowly begin to suffocate. That is essentially what the Strait of Hormuz represents on a global scale. The world's factories, industries, airplanes, automobiles, power plants, and the daily lives of billions of people depend on Middle Eastern oil. And the single most important route for that oil is this narrow stretch of water. Every day, more than 20 million barrels of oil pass through this passage. That amounts to nearly 20% of all seaborne oil traded around the world. In addition, enormous quantities of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, also move through these waters. If this route were ever closed, the first and hardest blow would be felt by countries such as China, India, Japan, and South Korea. Their industries run on Middle Eastern energy, and if that supply was suddenly interrupted, factories would slow down, transportation networks would begin to struggle, fuel prices would surge, and stock markets around the world would be thrown into chaos. But the most frightening thing about the Strait of Hormuz is not just its importance. The truly alarming reality is that this entire region exists on the edge of conflict almost every day. Iran realized long ago that the presence of the United States and its allies in the Persian Gulf posed one of its greatest strategic challenges. Since then, Iran has spent years deploying missiles, drones, and fast attack boats along its coastline, transforming this narrow stretch of sea into a fortress that would be extremely difficult to penetrate. Today, nearly every kilometer of the Strait of Hormuz is monitored by one form of military capability or another. Surveillance drones circle overhead. Massive warships patrol the waters. Destroyers armed with missiles keep watch over every movement. Submarines remain hidden beneath the surface, and many times the world has no idea who is tracking whom in the depths of these waters. Yet perhaps the most remarkable thing is that amid all this fear, tension, and military pressure, millions of people continue to live ordinary lives. Iranian fishermen head out to sea every morning in small boats, even while missile-equipped warships operate just a few kilometers away. Children go to school beneath skies filled with surveillance aircraft. Life goes on, even in the shadow of potential conflict. In a region where temperatures can soar to 54 degrees Celsius, where the meeting of land and sea creates breathtaking landscapes, and where every drop of fresh water is worth far more than its weight in money, local communities have still managed to build their lives. But how? How does life thrive in such a remote, unforgiving, and seemingly hostile environment? What historical forces shaped the creation of this dangerous maritime choke point? We will uncover it all in this gripping journey through the Strait of Hormuz. The history of the Strait of Hormuz, July 3rd, 1988, around 10:24 in the morning. The skies above the Persian Gulf were perfectly clear. From Iran's Bandar Abbas airport, a routine passenger aircraft takes off. Its name was Iran Air Flight 655. On board were 290 people. Young children, families, business travelers, and tourists heading off on vacation. For them, it was supposed to be nothing more than a simple 28-minute flight that would end in Dubai. No one had the slightest idea that within minutes they would become part of one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in history. The aircraft was gradually gaining altitude. Below, the waters of the Persian Gulf appeared calm and peaceful. But beneath that calm surface and above it, one of the world's most dangerous military tensions was unfolding. Sailing in those waters was a massive American Navy warship, the USS Vincennes. Its radar systems were continuously scanning the skies, because by that time, the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf were no longer just strategic waterways. They had become regions where the world's most powerful nations stood dangerously close to conflict. Suddenly, a signal appears on the radar screens of the USS Vincennes. The crew begins to suspect that it is not an ordinary civilian aircraft, but an Iranian F-14 fighter jet. A warning is transmitted. Then a second warning, then a third. But the pilots of the aircraft were not monitoring military frequencies because they were not fighter pilots. They were operating a routine commercial flight. Yet the tension in the Persian Gulf had become so intense that a few seconds of fear could result in the deaths of hundreds of people. And then Captain William Rogers gives the order. 2 SM-2 missiles are fired into the sky. Within seconds, the passenger aircraft is transformed into a massive fireball. Burning fragments begin falling into the waters of the Persian Gulf. In a single instant, 290 lives are gone. Children, women, entire families, all disappear into the sea. Even today, this incident is remembered as one of the most devastating tragedies in the history of the Middle East. The United States called it a mistake, but for the people of Iran, it was far more than that. It was a wound that made the Persian Gulf an even more dangerous and emotionally charged region. But the question is, why was the United States so alarmed? How could a passenger aircraft be mistaken for a fighter jet? Why had the Persian Gulf become such a dangerous place that every radar signal seemed like a potential attack? To understand the answer, we must travel back several centuries into history. The story begins in 1507, when Portuguese ships first arrived at this strategic waterway. At that time, global trade moved almost entirely by sea. Spices from India, silk from China, pearls from Arabia, all passed through these waters. The Portuguese quickly realized that if they could control this maritime gateway, they could control a significant portion of the world's trade. They seized control of Hormuz Island. Massive fortresses were built along the coastline. Cannons were installed to guard the passage. Taxes were imposed on every ship that sailed through. Then the Portuguese introduced the cartas system, a permit system under which no vessel could legally trade without Portuguese authorization. Gradually, the Strait of Hormuz became less of an international trade route and more of a private checkpoint of the Portuguese Empire. For nearly a century, Portugal extracted enormous wealth from these waters. But control of the seas never remains unchanged forever. In 1622, the Persian ruler Shah Abbas I formed an alliance with the British East India Company and launched an attack against the Portuguese. Fierce naval battles erupted across the region. The thunder of cannons echoed over the sea. Eventually, the Portuguese were driven out of Hormuz, ending their dominance over this critical waterway. As time moved forward and the 20th century arrived, the world suddenly developed an insatiable appetite for something new: oil. In 1908, oil was discovered in Iran, and from that moment, the Persian Gulf became a treasure chest for the world's most powerful nations. In the decades that followed, Iran experienced multiple political upheavals tied to the importance of oil. But the real firestorm erupted in 1980 when the Iran-Iraq War began. For 8 years, the Persian Gulf was transformed into a powder keg. Insurance companies started labeling the region as one of the most dangerous shipping zones on Earth. This period became known as the Tanker War. At the same time, the United States grew increasingly concerned. If the Strait of Hormuz were ever closed, the global oil supply could be severely disrupted. As a result, America deployed massive warships, destroyers, and aircraft carriers near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, meanwhile, strengthened its own position in the region. Between 2015 and 2024, Iran stopped or seized several international vessels, sometimes citing legal reasons, and at other times sending political messages. It became increasingly clear that the Strait of Hormuz was no longer just a trade route. It had become a stage where nations demonstrated power, influence, and strategic control. Now the question is, why is the Strait of Hormuz still so important today? Why do the world's most powerful nations keep a constant watch over this narrow stretch of water? At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is only about 33 kilometers wide. Iran lies on one side, while Oman and the United Arab Emirates sit on the other. But the real significance of this waterway is not its width, it's the enormous flow of energy that passes through it, energy that helps keep the modern world running. The vast oil exports of countries such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates all travel through this route before reaching global markets. Every single day, more than 20 million barrels of oil, along with massive quantities of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, pass through these waters. In other words, a significant portion of the world's energy supply depends on this thin maritime corridor. China, the world's second largest economy, receives a large share of its imported oil from the Persian Gulf, much of which travels through the Strait of Hormuz. Japan's situation is even more sensitive, with nearly 80% of its oil and gas supply depending on this route. South Korea relies on it for roughly 70% of its energy imports, while a significant portion of India's oil supply is also connected to this passage. In addition, a substantial amount of energy bound for Europe moves through these waters as well. That is why even the possibility of the strait being disrupted has the power to shake economies across the globe. The mysterious life of the villagers. But if you truly want to experience the Strait of Hormuz, you have to look beyond the maps and understand the communities that live along its shores. Because the true identity of this waterway is not defined only by oil tankers. It is shaped by the mountains, the villages, the sea winds, and the people who have called this harsh landscape home for centuries. One of the most mysterious places in this region is Qumzar, a small village hidden among the towering cliffs of Oman's Musandam Peninsula. It is a place so isolated that even today there is no direct road leading to it. The most common way to reach Qumzar is still by sea. Small wooden boats travel across seemingly calm waters. Along the way, enormous brown mountains rise on both sides. In many places, the cliffs are so steep that they appear to lean over the ocean like giant stone walls. And then, suddenly, nestled between those towering rocks, a small village comes into view. That village is Qumzar. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary fishing community. A handful of modest homes, boats resting along the shoreline, children playing near the water. But in reality, it is one of the most unique cultural worlds in the Middle East, because the people here speak a language that exists nowhere else on earth. It is called Qumzari. This language does not belong to a single civilization. It contains Arabic words, Persian words, Portuguese influences, and even traces of Hindi and Urdu. And that makes perfect sense. For centuries, merchants, sailors, and travelers passing through the Strait of Hormuz moved through this region. Over time, words from different languages blended together, gradually shaping Qumzari into a language of its own, a living reminder of the region's long maritime history. Many travelers describe Qumzar as a living museum, not just because of its buildings, but because of its people, their language, their traditions, and their way of life. Everything here seems to preserve echoes of a seafaring past that stretches back hundreds of years. The people of Qumzar live in harmony with the sea. Their days revolve around fishing, repairing boats, cultivating small patches of land between the rocky terrain, and adapting every aspect of life to the rhythms of the ocean. The climate here is extremely harsh. During the summer months, temperatures often rise to unbearable levels. The mountains heat up like giant slabs of iron, and even the wind feels scorching hot. And perhaps that is why Qumzar has preserved a tradition that seems almost unbelievable in today's modern world: seasonal migration. Every year, when the summer heat reaches its peak and life in the village becomes increasingly difficult, nearly the entire community leaves the area together. Families relocate temporarily to cooler places where conditions are more comfortable. Then, as the seasons change and life along the coast becomes manageable once again, they return to their village and continue the way of life their ancestors followed for generations. The Islands of Hormuz. The world of the Strait of Hormuz is not limited to the sea alone. Scattered throughout the region are numerous small islands that make this place even more mysterious. Some are so dry and rugged that from a distance they look like landscapes from another planet. In other areas, the color of the sea seems to shift unexpectedly, from deep blue to red, and then to shades of green. Keshem Island is considered the largest island in the entire region, but it is famous not only for its size, but also for its extraordinary geological formations. Here you'll find sharp mountain ridges, massive salt caves, deep valleys, and rock formations that appear as though they have been sculpted by the combined forces of wind and sea over thousands of years. Hormuz Island is equally remarkable. Many people refer to it as the Rainbow Island because its soil is anything but ordinary. Instead of the typical shades of brown, the landscape displays vibrant reds, oranges, yellows, and purples. In some places, the coastline itself appears painted in shades of red. Locals call this red soil surak, and interestingly, it is used not only as a natural pigment but also in certain traditional foods. As the sun begins to set and its golden light falls across these colorful hills, the entire island starts to resemble a giant painting. Yet behind this beauty lies a much harsher reality. The heat can be extreme, fresh water is limited, and in many areas, survival still feels like an ongoing struggle between human determination and the forces of nature. Hengam Island is one such small and peaceful island, where life seems to move at a much slower pace. There is none of the rush and noise found in major cities. Small fishing boats, sandy shorelines, and seabirds gliding above the water give this place a unique atmosphere. But perhaps the most special attraction of Hengam is its dolphins. In the early morning hours, when small boats head out to sea, dolphins can often be seen swimming alongside them. Watching them suddenly emerge from the calm blue waters adds an almost magical feeling to the entire region. But the real mystery reveals itself after sunset. In certain areas around the Strait of Hormuz, the sea begins to glow because of a phenomenon known as bioluminescence. And that is why Larak Island is often called the glowing island. In the darkness of night, as waves crash against the shore, microscopic organisms living in the water emit a brilliant blue light. It looks as if thousands of tiny stars are floating beneath the surface of the sea. When a boat cuts through the water, it leaves behind a glowing trail. And sometimes even the water beneath a person's feet begins to shimmer with a faint blue glow as they walk along the shoreline. The local people have lived alongside this sea for centuries. Yet even today, many travelers who witness this phenomenon for the first time struggle to believe their eyes, because what they are seeing is not a visual effect or an illusion. It is one of nature's most extraordinary wonders. The life of villagers in Laft village. But the most fascinating thing about the islands of the Strait of Hormuz is not just their beauty. The real surprise comes when you see how humans have managed to survive in such a harsh and seemingly unforgiving environment. Laft is one such village, located on the northwestern coast of Keshem Island. At first glance, it feels like a settlement frozen in time, caught between the desert and the sea. Houses built from coral stones, mud bricks, and wood stand so close together that, from above, the entire village resembles a giant maze. The narrow alleyways were intentionally designed to prevent the scorching desert winds from rushing through, allowing cooler air to remain trapped within the village. But the true symbol of Laft is the collection of tall towers rising above the rooftops. These structures are known as badgirs or wind catchers. To a first-time visitor, they may look like ancient watchtowers. In reality, they represent a cooling technology that has existed for centuries. Think about it. Today, modern cities rely on air conditioners, massive cooling systems, and enormous amounts of electricity to survive temperatures of 45 or even 50 degrees Celsius. Yet the people of Laft discovered a solution centuries ago. Without electricity, without machines, and without any modern engineering, these Badger towers were carefully positioned to face the direction from which cool sea breezes were most likely to arrive. The incoming air would be captured at the top of the tower and guided downward through specially designed channels into the homes below. As a result, indoor temperatures could remain 15 to 20 degrees cooler than the outside environment. Even when the heat outside became unbearable, people could still live comfortably indoors. What's even more remarkable is that the people here used architecture not merely for comfort, but for survival. Because in this region, there was very little room for error. Water was scarce, the heat was dangerous, and weather conditions at sea could change without warning. That is why Laft's greatest achievement can be seen in its water management system. Centuries ago, the village built 366 ancient wells, one for every day of the year. Rainwater was carefully collected and stored in these wells, and each one was used in a controlled manner to ensure that underground water reserves would never be exhausted. Here, water was not just a resource, it was life itself. Even today, the village elders tell stories of a time when every single drop of water was carefully calculated and managed. Decisions were made about which well would be opened during a particular season, how much water could be drawn, and how much each family was allowed to use. Survival here depended not only on hard work but also on discipline and careful planning. But Laft is not just a story of architecture and water management. It is also a world shaped by the sea. As dawn breaks, local fishermen set out across the water in small traditional wooden dhows. Many still rely on fishing techniques that have been passed down through generations. Friends, there was also a time when many people here earned their living through pearl diving. Before the age of oil, the Persian Gulf was considered one of the world's most important pearl trading regions. Divers would spend hours in the sea, descending into the depths without any modern equipment, searching for oysters that might contain valuable pearls. It was an incredibly dangerous profession, but it formed a vital part of the Gulf's economy. However, as cultured pearls began to be produced in laboratories around the world, this traditional industry gradually collapsed, leaving many pearl divers without their livelihoods. As evening approaches, the atmosphere of Laft changes completely. The intense heat of the day slowly begins to fade. Cool, salty air drifts in from the sea. People gather on their rooftops, children play in the narrow alleyways, and fishing boats return from the water. In the distance, the setting sun casts a golden glow across the village and the surrounding landscape. At that moment, Laft no longer feels like an ordinary village. It feels like a fragment of an older world, somehow preserved within the modern age. And perhaps that is why it is impossible to understand the Strait of Hormuz through geopolitics, oil, and military tensions alone. Because along these shores, there is more than a struggle for power. There is also a relationship between humanity and nature that has endured for thousands of years. The life underwater. But perhaps the most mysterious world of the Strait of Hormuz is not found above the surface. It's hidden beneath it. Because beneath the same waters through which the world's largest oil tankers travel, an entirely different world exists and thrives. At first glance, this part of the Persian Gulf appears harsh and unforgiving. Warm waters, intense sunlight, and salty sea air dominate the environment. Yet despite these challenging conditions, marine life continues to flourish here. In several areas around Hormuz, coral reefs provide shelter for colorful fish, sea turtles, and countless smaller marine creatures. But perhaps the most spectacular residents of these waters are the whale sharks, the largest fish on Earth. Around Keshem Island and Hormuz Island, these gentle giants are occasionally spotted swimming through the sea. Some can grow to more than 12 meters in length. Dolphins have also become one of the defining symbols of this region, frequently appearing in the water surrounding the islands and adding to the area's natural beauty. So that's all for today. What did you think about the history of the Strait of Hormuz, its global importance, and the lives of the people who call this remarkable region home? And if you ever had the opportunity, would you like to visit these remote and isolated villages yourself? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like and share the video. Thank you for watching.